in a time long before mankind had spread to the stars, before the age of strife and the Imperium of man. Terra, Earth, was a world much like any other, though locked in its own primal wars and struggles for survival. Humanity was scattered, fragile, and unaware of the greater dangers lurking in the universe. Yet, even then a threat loomed beyond the veil of reality in the dimension known as the warp. The warp was not just a space through which ships could travel. It was a realm of pure psychic energy, a place where emotions took form and dark gods fed on the souls of the living. And humanity, with its growing psychic potential, was increasingly vulnerable. The Chaos Gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, had sensed the rise of humanity and began to hunger for its destruction. The psychic power latent in humans would fuel their wars and their dominion over the material universe. It was in this time, more than 10,000 years before the rise of the Imperium, that the Emperor was born, not by accident or by simple chance, but as the culmination of a great and ancient ritual. The birth of the Emperor of mankind was no ordinary event. His creation was the culmination of a plan woven in the fabric of time, a convergence of ancient powers and desperate wills bound together in a singular purpose. His origin lies in the dawn of humanity, when Terra was young and untamed, when mankind was still struggling to find its place in a dangerous and unforgiving world. The Emperor was born not as an accident of evolution, but as a deliberate act of creation, a beacon of hope designed to shield humanity from the ever-present threat of the warp. Long before humanity understood the stars or the mysteries of the Imperium, there existed a select few who could see beyond the veil of reality. These were the shamans, the first psychers, whose connection to the warp allowed them to sense the ebb and flow of the universe's energies. They were scattered across early Terra, living among nomadic tribes or ancient civilizations, often revered as wise men or prophets. Their abilities were not born of mutation or genetic accident. Instead, they drew from the primal currents of life and death, the natural energy of all things. With their gifts, they healed the sick, guided their people, and warded off spiritual threats. For centuries, the shamans served as humanity's guardians, their psychic power forming a tenuous bridge between the material world and the psychic tides of the warp. But over time, the nature of the warp began to shift. The warp, once a relatively neutral dimension, started to darken with the birth of new sentient races. Powerful emotions like rage, despair, lust, and ambition began to give shape to entities within the warp. These nascent forces, later known as the Chaos Gods, fed off the psychic emissions of intelligent beings, and humanity, with its burgeoning psychic potential, became a tempting prize. As the Chaos Gods grew in power, they sought to influence the material universe, whispering into the minds of mortals, planting seeds of madness, corruption, and ambition. The shamans who had once drawn freely from the warp now found their powers compromised. Each time they died and their spirits returned to the Imperium, they faced the risk of being devoured or twisted by the dark entities lurking there. What had once been a peaceful cycle of rebirth and renewal for the shamans became a perilous journey through a warp teeming with danger. As the centuries passed, the shamans realized the full extent of the threat they faced. Each generation was weaker than the last, their connection to the warp becoming more hazardous. What had once been a cycle of reincarnation became an unbearable burden as their souls were tainted by the malevolent entities growing in the warp. Fewer shamans were being reborn, and those who were returned, their powers diminished or their minds broken by the corruption they had encountered in death. In their visions, the shamans saw what would happen if the Chaos Gods were allowed to grow unchecked. Humanity would be consumed, enslaved by its own latent psychic potential, a resource to be harvested by dark powers. The shamans knew that without intervention, the Chaos Gods would eventually corrupt the entirety of humanity, turning it into a plaything for their own malevolent designs. This was not just a matter of survival for the shamans. It was the fate of humanity itself. Faced with the prospect of extinction, the shamans convened in secret across Terra. Their tribes and civilizations were scattered, their languages and cultures different, but they shared a common understanding of the threat they faced. The only way to protect humanity was to create a being of such immense power and purity that he could shield humanity from the predations of chaos, a figure who could lead and protect the species in both the material realm and the Imperium. After decades of deliberation, the shamans devised a desperate plan. They would sacrifice their physical bodies and combine their psychic essence into a single immortal entity. This being would be born with the combined wisdom and power of all the shamans, immune to the ravages of the warp and capable of guiding humanity toward a future free from the corruption of chaos. It was a ritual that would require the death of every shaman on Terra, a final and irrevocable act. But they believed it was the only way to save humanity. The ritual took place in a secret location, far from the eyes of the tribes and empires of ancient Terra. Thousands of shamans gathered, their numbers drawn from every corner of the world, united in their purpose. They had prepared for years, knowing that their death would be the birth of something far greater than themselves. The ritual was both a physical and psychic event. On the material plane, the shamans gathered in a great circle, chanting ancient incantations, drawing power from the earth and the stars. In the warp, their souls began to merge, coalescing into a single point of radiant light. The warp itself seemed to tremble at the power of the ritual, and the chaos gods, sensing the birth of something that could challenge their dominion, surged forward to stop it. But the shamans were prepared. They had woven their ritual with layers of protection, drawing upon the natural energies of the universe to shield themselves from the predations of the dark gods. As the ritual reached its climax, the combined souls of the shamans were fused into a single immense psychic entity. In that moment, the Emperor of Mankind was born. His birth was not a dramatic event in the eyes of the world. There were no great cataclysms or signs in the sky. The tribes and empires of Terra continued their wars and struggles, unaware of the monumental change that had just occurred. But deep within the warp, the chaos gods recoiled. They had felt the birth of something that could rival their power, something immune to their influence. For the first time, they sensed a true threat to their dominion over humanity. The Emperor did not emerge fully formed in golden armor, nor did he immediately set out to conquer the world. Instead, he was born as a mortal man, living among humanity in secret. He inherited the combined knowledge, wisdom, and power of the shamans. But he knew that his true purpose would take millennia to unfold. Humanity was not yet ready for his leadership. The species needed to grow, to evolve, to experience the hardships that would forge it into a race capable of resisting the lure of chaos. In his earliest years, the Emperor lived among the people of ancient Terra, moving from tribe to tribe, observing and learning. He witnessed the birth of civilizations and the fall of empires, always remaining in the shadows. His immense psychic power allowed him to influence events subtly, guiding humanity without revealing his true nature. He planted the seeds of knowledge, fostering the development of agriculture, language, and science. He encouraged leaders to rise who would bring peace and prosperity to their people, though he always ensured that humanity experienced its share of struggles and challenges. For millennia, the Emperor walked the earth as a silent observer, his presence unknown to the people he sought to protect. While his physical form was indistinguishable from that of any other human, his mind was a vast ocean of knowledge and psychic power, extending across time and space. He had no need for sleep, nor did he age as others did. His perception of time was far beyond that of mortals, and he could experience decades as others might experience mere moments. But rather than dominate or control, the Emperor chose to learn. He understood that his time would come, but humanity needed to evolve, to develop its own strength before it could accept the unity he would one day offer. Thus, the emperor spent lifetimes observing, shaping, and guiding humanity through its darkest and most triumphant eras. Throughout human history, the emperor took on many identities. He became a part of every culture, every civilization, slipping into the role of warrior, philosopher, craftsman, or healer as needed. In the ancient empires of Mesopotamia, he was a humble scribe chronicling the rise of the first human cities. As the pharaohs of Egypt built their mighty pyramids, he walked among them as a priest, whispering wisdom into the ears of kings, ensuring that the spark of civilization did not burn out too soon. He fought alongside warriors in battles that defined the future of empires, but just as often he lived as a simple wanderer, content to observe rather than act. He learned the languages of every tribe and nation, becoming fluent in the tongues of peoples now long forgotten. He immersed himself in their ways of life, sharing in their triumphs and sorrows, but never allowing himself to become too attached. For the emperor knew that his purpose was not to rule, but to guide humanity as a whole, to steer it toward the destiny that awaited among the stars. The emperor's influence was subtle in these long lifetimes of observation. His powers, vast and incomprehensible, were often tempered by his patience. He would appear as a simple man of wisdom, a scholar or a teacher, nudging humanity in the right direction without ever revealing the full extent of his abilities. His hand was light on the wheel of history, preferring to plant the seeds of progress rather than force his will upon the world. The emperor understood that human nature required conflict and challenge in order to grow. Too much interference would stunt humanity's development. Too little, and they would be lost to barbarism and chaos. His influence extended to some of the most critical moments in human history, though he always remained behind the scenes. In the cradles of civilization, he encouraged the spread of agriculture, teaching the early farmers how to work the land and store their grain. This in turn allowed the rise of cities, where knowledge could accumulate and culture could thrive. He worked among the artisans and engineers of early societies, guiding the creation of roads, aqueducts, and writing systems, innovations that would bind humanity together across vast distances. At times, the emperor found himself at the heart of great empires, where his influence was more direct. As a general in the armies of ancient Greece, he fought to preserve the fragile city-states from falling into disunity, understanding that the preservation of knowledge and philosophy would benefit all of humanity. In the courts of China's dynasties, he counseled emperors, helping them maintain the balance between order and chaos, and ensuring that humanity's cultural achievements would not be lost to the fires of war. Yet for every civilization he helped guide to greatness, the emperor also allowed many to fall. He understood that collapse and renewal were essential parts of humanity's growth. Civilizations that became too decadent or corrupt were left to crumble, their lessons serving as warnings for those that would follow. The emperor's foresight allowed him to witness these rises and falls with an unparalleled perspective, understanding that even the darkest moments in human history were necessary steps toward the greater unity he envisioned. In the shadowy corners of the world, the emperor also confronted threats that went unseen by most. He alone could perceive the creeping influence of the warp, the slow infiltration of dark forces that whispered into the minds of rulers and tyrants. The chaos gods, sensing the emperor's presence, sought to undermine his work, tempting humans with power, greed, and ambition. But the emperor was vigilant. In countless instances, he intervened to stop these forces from gaining a foothold in the material world. The emperor's vision for humanity was not merely one of survival, but of evolution. He saw the potential within the species to become something far greater, a force capable of mastering both the material and psychic realms. But this evolution could not be rushed. Humanity had to experience the full range of its potential, both the light and the dark, before it could achieve true unity. The emperor's role was to guide humanity through these trials, ensuring that it learned from its mistakes and grew stronger with each passing century. Throughout his long observation, He fostered the development of human culture and science. He ensured that technological advancements were made at key moments in history, guiding inventors and scholars toward discoveries that would lay the foundation for future progress. However, he was also wary of humans' tendency to misuse technology. There were times when he deliberately held back certain advancements, fearing that humanity was not yet mature enough to wield them responsibly. But even as humanity grew in strength and knowledge, the Emperor sensed the storm on the horizon. The warp was growing more dangerous, and the whispers of chaos were becoming louder. The Age of Strife, a period of unimaginable turmoil and destruction, was approaching. The Emperor knew that soon humanity would face its greatest challenge, and it would be his task to lead them through it. While the Emperor lived among mortals, his true war was fought in the shadows. The Chaos Gods were ever watchful, their influence creeping into the minds of men and women, sowing discord and madness. Though they could not touch the Emperor directly, their agents worked tirelessly to corrupt humanity, turning leaders into tyrants, priests into demagogues, and nations into instruments of war and bloodshed. At times he would intervene directly. There were whispers of great battles fought in the warp, where the Emperor, clad in armor of pure light, faced the twisted demons of chaos in single combat. These battles were not seen by mortal eyes, but their effects rippled through history. A tyrant would suddenly fall ill and die, a great kingdom would collapse overnight, or a seemingly invincible army would be struck down by an unforeseen calamity. These were the Emperor's victories, achieved not through armies or weapons, but through his mastery of the warp and his ability to strike at the heart of chaos itself. At other times he would confront corrupted individuals, those whose souls had been tainted by the whispers of the dark gods. These confrontations were often subtle, hidden from the view of ordinary people. A king might find his closest advisor suddenly gone, a merchant prince might mysteriously lose his fortune, or a heretic cult would be wiped out in a single night by what seemed like divine intervention. But he was not infallible. Even he could not prevent all of humanity's tragedies. He watched as great empires rose and fell, as wars consumed millions of lives, and as mankind continued to struggle in its own darkness. Every death, every act of cruelty was a wound to his heart, but he knew that these were the growing pains of a species that had yet to find its true potential. He could not protect them from every hardship, nor could he shield them from the consequences of their own choices. Yet through it all, he never wavered in his purpose. He knew that one day, humanity would face a threat so great that it would require his full power. Until that day came, he would continue to walk among them, quietly shaping their destiny, preparing them for the trials to come. The Emperor's grand plan was not just for Terra, or for any single era of humanity. It was for the entire species across all time and space. He knew that the stars held humanity's future, but that future would be fraught with dangers, both within and beyond. He could see the future wars, the rise of chaos, and the fragmentation of mankind. He could also see the moment when he would have to step out of the shadows and lead humanity openly. But for now, he would continue his work in secret, knowing that the time of the Imperium was still far beyond the horizon. For millennia, the Emperor prepared, watching, guiding, and learning. His enemies in the warp grew stronger, and the time for subtlety was coming to an end. Soon, he would need to reveal himself to unify humanity before it was too late. But that moment had not yet come. Until then, the Emperor would continue his silent vigil, the hidden guardian of mankind. The man was patient, for he knew that the galaxy waited for him. His psychic power was perhaps the most awe-inspiring aspect of his nature, though few truly understood its depth. It was said that his mind touched every corner of the galaxy, that he could see into the future as easily as he could manipulate the present. With a thought, he could bend the very fabric of reality, reaching into the warp to shape matter, influence minds, and wield forces that lesser beings would never comprehend. His psychic presence alone was enough to silence rooms, to fill those in his proximity with either awe or terror, depending on the nature of their souls. His foresight was not like the glimpses of possibility gifted to some psychers. It was something far more potent. The Emperor could see the shifting web of time, discerning the countless futures that lay ahead, sifting through them to choose the paths that would lead to humanity's survival. It wasn't a perfect vision. The future was always in flux, and the Chaos Gods worked tirelessly to obscure and manipulate it. Yet the Emperor saw further and more clearly than any other, always maneuvering the pieces of the galaxy's vast game with a precision no one could match. He didn't speak of these abilities often. They were just another part of him, integrated into the being who had walked among men for millennia. In truth, most of his psychic gifts went unseen. Their effects felt only in the ripples of history. A king might change his course after a strange dream. A nation might rise where once there was only discord. The Emperor's touch was subtle, for he knew that to rule by raw power alone was to invite ruin. Humanity had to be guided, not controlled, at least not yet. And then, of course, there was his resistance to chaos, a force which lurked in the hearts of men and in the shadows of the warp. The Chaos Gods had long sensed the Emperor's presence, but they could not claim him. His psychic light burned too brightly, casting them back whenever they tried to reach him. To the forces of the warp, the Emperor was like a blazing sun, too brilliant, too pure for their corrupting tendrils to touch. It was not just that he resisted them, he was their antithesis, a being crafted to stand against the very essence of chaos itself. But his resistance came at a cost. The Emperor had to remain vigilant, forever watching the thin line between the material world and the warp. He could never allow himself to falter, for to slip even once would be to invite catastrophe. The Chaos Gods were patient, and they knew that even the mightiest could fall. Yet the Emperor never wavered. He carried this burden, just as he carried so many others, with an unyielding resolve. Immortality for him was not a gift, but a necessity. The Emperor had lived for thousands of years, watching as the world around him changed again and again. While others aged and died, he remained unchanging, undiminished. His body was immune to the ravages of time, his cells regenerating faster than they could be destroyed. He had mastered the very secrets of life itself, understanding the mechanisms that govern biology and death. Wounds that would have felled any other being healed in moments. Poison, disease, even the void of space. None of these could touch him. Yet his immortality was not a source of pride. The Emperor bore it with quiet dignity, knowing that it was both a gift and a curse. For every century he lived, he watched more and more of those he guided fall into the grave. He saw the same mistakes repeated, the same struggles born anew. But it was this perspective, this endless observation, that gave him the patience to continue. He had learned long ago that the progress of humanity could not be rushed. It had to come in its own time. But immortality also made him a master of knowledge. For with each passing century, the Emperor absorbed more than any mortal mind could fathom. His wisdom stretched back to the earliest days of Terra civilization, encompassing every field of study, every science, every philosophy. His memory held the records of wars fought and lost, empires risen and fallen, technologies invented and abandoned. He was a living repository of all human achievement, and yet even that was not enough to satisfy his thirst for knowledge. He sought always to learn more, to push the boundaries of understanding, so that he could guide humanity better. If his psychic power and immortality were formidable, the Emperor's skill in warfare was equally unmatched. For thousands of years he had fought in battles of every kind, primitive skirmishes with sticks and stones, grand sieges with iron and fire, and the immense galaxy-spanning wars that would define the future of mankind. He had been a general, a soldier, a tactician, and a warrior, mastering every aspect of combat from the personal to the strategic. In the heat of battle, the Emperor was an unstoppable force. His combat prowess was not merely the result of training, though he had perfected every martial art known to man. It was something deeper, something innate. His reflexes were superhuman. his movements impossibly precise. With a blade, he could fell an enemy with a single strike, and his skill in hand-to-hand combat was beyond compare. He could see the flow of battle like no other, reading his opponent's intentions before they even moved. Yet he never fought for glory or personal satisfaction. Every conflict was part of a larger plan, every victory a step toward his ultimate goal. As a general, the Emperor commanded legions with the same ease that a master craftsman wields his tools. His strategies were flawless, his logistics perfect. He understood the psychology of war as deeply as its mechanics, knowing when to strike, when to retreat, when to break the will of his enemies, and when to inspire his own forces to impossible feats. His armies fought with a discipline and unity that reflected his leadership, for the Emperor was not just a commander, he was the embodiment of purpose on the battlefield. He had led campaigns across Terra, unifying the warring tribes and nations under a single banner. And later, as humanity spread to the stars, he would lead the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. The Legends Astartes, the Space Marines, each crafted in his image, each an extension of his will. But even before the Great Crusade, even before the unification of Terra, the Emperor had fought wars that no one remembered, against enemies that no one knew existed. His battles were not just against human foes, but against the dark forces of the warp, the entities that threatened to unravel reality itself. In all things, the Emperor was a being of purpose. His powers, vast and diverse as they were never used for selfish reasons. Every choice he made, every battle he fought, every life he spared or ended, was driven by his singular goal, the survival and ascension of humanity. He was not a tyrant, though his will was absolute. He did not seek to be worshipped, though many came to see him as a god. The Emperor was a guardian, a teacher, a warrior, and a ruler. But above all, he was the last hope of mankind. A hope that burned as bright as the stars themselves, defying the darkness that sought to engulf all. The Emperor's patience was immense, but even his vigilance could not delay the inevitable forever. The age of strife, a period of unimaginable horror and darkness, gripped the galaxy. Warp storms raged unchecked across the stars, severing humanity's colonies from one another. Whole systems fell into anarchy as technology decayed, and long isolated worlds slid into barbarism. Across Terra, the birthplace of humanity, warlords battled for supremacy, ruling over the ruins of a once great civilization. Terra had become a wasteland of toxic skies and blood-soaked soil, where cruelty and ambition reigned unchecked. It was during this time that he, after millennia of observing and subtly guiding humanity, chose to step out of the shadows and reveal himself in full. His moment had come. When he revealed himself, he did so not as a distant god, but as a man of unparalleled power and vision. His golden armor gleamed with the light of hope, a stark contrast to the grim, broken world that surrounded him. Warlords who had ruled with iron fists and brutal strength found themselves utterly powerless before the Emperor. They could see it in his eyes, a confidence that did not need to be spoken, a force that they could not hope to defy. Some knelt before him, recognizing his superiority, while others resisted, only to be crushed by the Emperor's army of genetically enhanced warriors. These warriors, the Thunder Warriors, were his first soldiers, brutal, immense, and nearly unstoppable. They were created for one purpose: to conquer Terra. The Emperor marched them across the world, tearing down the strongholds of warlords, one by one. The world was scorched in blood and fire, but with each victory, Terra inched closer to unity. It was a long and brutal campaign, lasting decades, but the Emperor's vision never faltered. His was not a campaign of petty conquest. It was a mission to bring humanity back from the brink of annihilation. Where there was room for diplomacy, he offered peace. Many of the lesser warlords, sensing the inevitability of his triumph, swore fealty to him, and those who showed wisdom were allowed to keep their positions, now serving a higher core. But to those who refused, there was only war. In the end, none could resist. The Emperor's intellect combined with his sheer force of will outmaneuvered every enemy. The techno-barbarian warlords of Terra fell, and in their place rose a single unified world, the foundation of a new age. Yet the unification of Terra was not merely a military feat, it was a rebirth of civilization. Under his guidance, the Mechanicum of Mars, a bastion of technological knowledge, was brought into alignment with Terra, and their technological expertise fueled the Emperor's grand ambitions. Ancient knowledge was rediscovered, great cities were rebuilt, and the fragmented remnants of humanity's once mighty empire began to stir once more. With Terra unified, he turned his gaze to the stars. He knew that Terra was only the beginning. Humanity had spread far and wide across the galaxy before the Age of Strife, but now those colonies lay in ruins, many of them lost to barbarism, corruption, or worse. To reunite them under one banner, to restore the light of humanity across the stars. This was the Emperor's true goal, but he knew he could not do it alone. Long before the final battles of the Unification Wars were fought, the Emperor had already begun to plan for the next phase of his grand design. Terra would be the cradle of his new Imperium, but the galaxy was vast, and even the Emperor, for all his power, could not be everywhere at once. He needed generals, beings of immense power, who could not only lead armies, but inspire entire worlds to embrace his vision for humanity. Thus, the Primarch Project was born. The Emperor, a master of genetic science, sought to create beings in his own image. 20 sons, each embodying a fragment of his vast strength, intelligence, and will. These Primarchs would lead his legions, the Astartes, into battle, spreading his vision across the galaxy. Each Primarch was designed to excel in different aspects of war and leadership, reflecting the many facets of the Emperor's own mind. Some would be warriors of unparalleled skill, while others would be strategists, statesmen, or philosophers. Together, they would be the perfect instruments to unite humanity under the banner of the Imperium. However, before the Primarchs could be fully realized, a catastrophe occurred. The forces of chaos, sensing the Emperor's plan, acted to thwart him. In a desperate bid to stop his work, they reached into the Emperor's gene laboratories and scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy, flinging them to distant worlds where they would grow up in isolation. The Emperor's vision was shattered, but not destroyed. Despite this setback, the Emperor pressed forward. He had already created the Space Marine Legions, genetically enhanced warriors based on the genetic template of the Primarchs. Though these sons of Terra were less powerful than the Primarchs themselves, they were still far superior to any ordinary human, capable of superhuman feats of strength, endurance, and combat prowess. With the legions at his command, the Emperor set out to reclaim his lost sons and begin the Great Crusade. With Terra now unified and his armies prepared, the Emperor launched the Great Crusade, an epic campaign to reunite the scattered human worlds of the galaxy. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring not just military might, but a vision of unity that would inspire entire star systems to throw off their chains and embrace the cause of the Imperium. The Emperor did not seek to conquer through fear or brute force alone. Though the legions of Space Marines were unstoppable in battle, the Emperor's goal was to bring about the reunification of humanity through shared purpose. Wherever possible, he sought diplomacy, offering worlds a place within the Imperium if they were willing to accept his rule and contribute to the greater good of humanity. In return, these worlds were given protection, knowledge, and the promise of a future free from the horrors of chaos and Xenos threats. But there were many who resisted, clinging to their independence, their ancient traditions, or their corrupted ways. To these worlds, the Emperor brought war. His Space Marine legions descended like avenging angels, sweeping aside armies, bringing tyrants to their knees, and purging the influence of chaos wherever it was found. The Emperor himself often led these campaigns, standing at the forefront of battle, a golden figure whose mere presence could turn the tide of war. As the Great Crusade spread across the stars, the Emperor began to recover his lost sons. Each Primarch, once isolated and alone, had grown into a figure of immense power in their own right, shaped by the worlds they had been cast upon. Some had become kings, others warlords, and still others had embraced philosophies that mirrored the Emperor's own ideals. One by one the Emperor found them, and with each Primarch restored to his side, the strength of the Imperium grew. The legions, once scattered and divided, now marched under the command of their Primarchs, their purpose sharpened and their strength redoubled. Each Primarch brought their own unique skills to the battlefield, embodying different aspects of the Emperor's grand vision. Some, like Horus and Sanguinius, inspired their troops with unmatched charisma, while others, like Perturabo and Robauta Guilliman, were masters of strategy and logistics. Together, they formed the core of the Emperor's war effort, leading the Great Crusade with a relentless drive toward victory. The Great Crusade was not just a war of conquest, it was a campaign of reclamation. The Emperor's vision was one of unity, of bringing all of humanity under a single banner, but it was also a vision of enlightenment. The Imperium was not just a military power, it was a beacon of knowledge, science, and progress. With each world that was brought into the fold, the Emperor sought to restore the lost knowledge of humanity, rebuilding the great technologies that had been forgotten during the Age of Strife. For decades, the Great Crusade pushed forward, reclaiming thousands of worlds and forging a galaxy-spanning empire. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity was becoming a reality, a testament to his vision and will. The legions, led by the Primarchs, became legendary, their victories spoken of in awe across the stars. Yet even as the Imperium expanded, shadows loomed on the horizon. The forces of chaos, though driven back, had not been defeated. The galaxy was vast, and many worlds harbored secrets and dangers that even the Emperor's foresight could not predict. The Great Crusade was a time of triumph, but it was also a time of great peril. Still, the Emperor pressed on. His dream of a united humanity was closer than ever, and the Imperium, under his guidance, stood as a shining beacon in the darkness of the galaxy. But the Emperor knew that even greater challenges lay ahead, challenges that would test the very foundations of his vision for mankind. As the Great Crusade pressed forward, expanding the Imperium and reclaiming lost human worlds, the Emperor's mind was always on the future, a future far beyond the battles being fought in the present. His vision for humanity was grander than mere survival or the unification of scattered planets. It was a future in which humanity would transcend its limitations, rising above the dangers of the warp and the dark gods that lurked within it. His plans were as ambitious as they were secretive, for the Emperor knew that revealing the full scope of his intentions too soon could invite disaster. The galaxy was not yet ready to understand the depths of his vision. At the core of the Emperor's grand plan was the belief that humanity was destined for ascension, a future in which they would become the masters of the galaxy, free from the corrupting influence of the warp and the predations of the chaos gods. The Emperor had always seen humanity as the greatest of all species, with the potential to surpass even the most ancient and powerful Xenos empires. But this potential could only be realized if humanity could free itself from the shackles of superstition, fear, and the malevolent entities that fed off human emotion. The Emperor had long observed the effects of the warp on sentient life. He knew that the Chaos Gods thrived on belief, on the unchecked emotions of mortals. Khorne fed on bloodlust, Tzeentch on ambition and change, Nurgle on despair, and Slaanesh on excess. These gods were parasites, their power growing with every war, every act of cruelty, every indulgence in greed or lust. And humanity, with its burgeoning psychic potential, was at risk of becoming the greatest feast the Chaos Gods had ever known. But the Emperor had a solution, one that would take centuries, perhaps millennia, to fully realize. He would lead humanity to a future where they no longer needed to rely on the warp for travel or power. a future where the influence of chaos would be starved into irrelevance. To do this, he would first have to cut humanity off from the gods entirely. To protect humanity from the influence of chaos, the Emperor developed a philosophical doctrine that would form the foundation of his Imperium, the imperial truth. This was the belief that there were no gods, no supernatural powers, only science, reason, and the natural laws of the universe. It was a lie, of course. The Emperor himself knew better than anyone that gods existed and that the warp was real. But he also knew that belief in these entities only empowered them. The Chaos Gods fed on worship, on fear, on the subconscious connections that mortals made between the immaterium and the material world. To deny their existence, to stamp out religion and superstition, was to starve the gods of their power. As the Great Crusade spread across the stars, the Emperor enforced the imperial truth with unwavering conviction. On every world that was brought into the fold of the Imperium, the worship of gods, any gods, was forbidden. Temples were torn down, priests were silenced, and entire cultures were reshaped to align with the Emperor's vision of a purely secular future. The Emperor's soldiers, particularly the Space Marines, were indoctrinated with the belief that gods were falsehoods, that humanity needed no divine guidance to achieve greatness. To worship anything other than the Emperor's vision for mankind was heresy. This doctrine was not without its challenges. Many worlds had deeply ingrained religious beliefs, and not all were willing to cast them aside so easily. On such worlds, resistance to the imperial truth was met with force. The Emperor believed that the ends justified the means. If some civilization had to be destroyed in order to rid humanity of its dependence on gods and superstition, so be it. The future of the species depended on it, but the Emperor's lie was a dangerous one, even if it was well-intentioned. He knew that the Chaos Gods were not so easily defeated. They were ancient and powerful, and though their strength could be diminished, they could never be fully destroyed as long as sentient beings existed. The warp would exist, and so too would chaos. But the Emperor believed he could at least shield humanity from their influence, if not forever, then for long enough to secure a future where humanity could stand on its own. While the imperial truth served as the philosophical foundation of the Emperor's plan to sever humanity from the warp, it was not enough on its own. The warp, for all its dangers, was still a necessary tool for space travel. Without it, the vast distances between star systems could not be traversed in any reasonable amount of time. The Imperium needed the warp to function, but the Emperor sought a way to eliminate this reliance once and for all. He envisioned a future where humanity could travel the stars without ever touching the warp, without ever risking the corrupting influence of the Chaos Gods. This vision led to one of the Emperor's most ambitious and secretive projects, the Webway. Project the Webway was an ancient network of tunnels that existed between dimensions, created by the Eldar long before humanity had even risen from its primitive state. Unlike the warp, the Webway was stable, a labyrinth of pathways that allowed instantaneous travel across the galaxy without the dangers of the Imperium. The Emperor, with his vast knowledge of both science and the warp, saw in the Webway the key to humanity's independence from chaos. If he could unlock the secrets of the Webway and create a new human pathway through it, the Imperium would no longer need to use the warp for travel. The Chaos Gods would be cut off from humanity, their power starved, their influence reduced to a distant whisper. The Emperor's plan was nothing short of revolutionary, but it was also fraught with risk. The Webway, though ancient and powerful, was not without its dangers. The Eldar had used it for millennia, but even they had lost control of parts of it to the predations of the warp and its demonic inhabitants. The Emperor believed that he could stabilize the Webway, fortifying it with his own psychic power and the advanced technology of the Imperium. He envisioned a time when human ships would travel through these stable corridors, free from the warp storms and demonic threats that plagued warp travel. The Emperor's construction of the Webway portal beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra was the most closely guarded secret of his. reign. Even his sons, the Primarchs, knew little of the true extent of the project. The Emperor had entrusted the task to his Mechanicum allies and his most loyal custodians, who worked day and night to bring his vision to life. Deep beneath the surface of Terra, the Emperor himself labored tirelessly, using his immense psychic power to guide the construction and ensure the webway's stability. But the project was not without its challenges. The webway was ancient and fragile, and the warp's influence was always close at hand. The Emperor could feel the pressure building, the lurking threat of chaos waiting for a single misstep, a single moment of weakness. Yet he pressed on, for he knew that the webway was the key to humanity's future. If the project succeeded, humanity would be free from the warp, and the chaos gods would be unable to reach them. But if it failed, the consequences could be catastrophic. As the Emperor worked to bring his plans to fruition, he could feel the threads of fate tightening around him. The galaxy was a vast, unpredictable place, and even his immense foresight could not account for every variable. His Primarchs, his sons, were spread across the galaxy, each leading their legions in the Great Crusade. Some were steadfast and loyal, but others were troubled, restless, and beginning to question their father's vision. The forces of chaos, though weakened by the imperial truth, were far from defeated. In the shadows, they whispered to those who would listen, planting seeds of doubt, anger, and betrayal. The Emperor knew that time was running out. The Webway project had to succeed, and humanity had to be brought to a place where it could stand without him. He had never intended to rule forever. His goal had always been to lay the foundation for a self-sufficient Imperium, one that could endure long after he had withdrawn from public life. But fate, as always, had other plans. Even as the Emperor worked in secret beneath the Imperial Palace, the galaxy around him was changing. The Great Crusade was nearing its zenith. But in the heart of the Imperium, forces were gathering that would challenge everything the Emperor had built. The threads of fate were tightening, and the Emperor, for all his power and wisdom, could feel the storm coming. He could only hope that his plans would be enough to withstand it. The Emperor had always known that the greatest threats to his vision for humanity would not come from without, but from within. For all his power, all his foresight, he could not completely shield the hearts and minds of his sons, his beloved Primarchs, from the corrupting whispers of the warp. And yet, despite all the dangers, the Emperor had never anticipated the scale of the betrayal that was about to unfold, nor that it would come from his most trusted and beloved son, Horus Lupercal. The War Master of the Imperium was the Emperor's chosen heir, the one who had been entrusted with command of the Great Crusade in his father's absence. Horus had been everything the Emperor had hoped for in a son, a charismatic leader, a brilliant strategist, and a figure capable of uniting the legions and leading humanity's armies to victory across the stars. The Emperor had placed in Horus the highest of expectations, granting him authority over his brothers and leaving him to carry the banner of the Imperium, while the Emperor withdrew to Terra to work on his secret Webway project. But the seeds of doubt had already taken root. Horus, like many of the Primarchs, struggled with the Emperor's distance. The Emperor had given little explanation for his withdrawal from the front lines of the Great Crusade, and Horus, burdened by the immense responsibilities of his new role, felt abandoned. He, like his brothers, was left to wonder why the Emperor no longer fought beside them, why he had left his sons to wage war while he worked in secret on Terra. The forces of chaos, always watching for weakness, saw their opportunity. They whispered into Horus's mind, feeding his insecurities, stoking the flames of his ambition. At first, Horus resisted, believing himself too strong, too loyal to fall to such temptations. But the force of the warp are insidious, and they found the cracks in Horus's heart. Deepening them day by day, they showed him visions of the future, a future where the Emperor would cast aside his sons, where Horus and his brothers were nothing more than tools for the Emperor's ascension to godhood. They convinced him that the Emperor was a hypocrite, preaching the imperial truth while secretly aspiring to godhood himself. It was a lie, but Horus believed it. And once he accepted the whispers of chaos, there was no turning back. Horus fell, seduced by the power and promises of the ruinous powers. He became their champion, the chosen vessel of their will. And in his betrayal, he brought ruin upon the Imperium. One by one, he turned his fellow Primarchs against the Emperor, corrupting some of the most powerful and loyal legions. What began as discontent and doubt grew into open rebellion. Horus, the Emperor's favored son, now stood as his greatest enemy. The galaxy was torn apart by civil war. The Horus heresy, as it came to be known, shattered the dream of the Imperium. The traitor legions, led by Horus, unleashed a campaign of destruction that consumed world after world. Brothers turned on brothers, and the very foundations of the Imperium trembled under the weight of the conflict. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity, free from the clutches of the warp, was unraveling. The culmination of Horus's betrayal came in the form of an assault on the very heart of the Imperium, Terra itself. Horus, now fully corrupted by chaos, led his traitor legion to the gates of the Imperial Palace. The Emperor, who had been laboring tirelessly on the Webway project, was forced to abandon his work and prepare for the final battle. He knew that if Terra fell, if Horus succeeded in his coup, then humanity would be doomed. The Chaos Gods would consume everything, and the galaxy would be plunged into eternal darkness. The Siege of Terra was the most devastating conflict in human history. Millions of soldiers, from the legions of space marines to the ordinary troops of the Imperial Army, fought and died in defense of the Emperor's dream. The traitor legions, bolstered by demonic forces and the dark sorcery of the warp, assaulted the walls of the Imperial Palace with relentless fury. Titans, towering war machines, clashed with one another in battles that shook the very earth, and the skies above Terra were filled with the burning wreckage of starships as fleets engaged in brutal combat. Within the palace, the Emperor marshaled his forces, directing the defense with unparalleled precision. His loyal sons, the remaining Primarchs who had not fallen to chaos, stood by his side, their legions fighting with every ounce of strength they had left. Robut Guilliman, Sanguinius, Jagatai Khan and others fought valiantly, but they knew the odds were against them. The traitor forces were overwhelming, and with each passing day, the defences of the palace grew weaker. Yet despite the horrors of the siege, the Emperor did not lose hope. He knew that the fate of humanity rested on this final battle, and he prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation with Horus. The Emperor had always believed that Horus, despite his fall, could be redeemed. But as the siege dragged on, it became clear that only one of them would survive the final confrontation. As the walls of the Imperial Palace began to buckle under the relentless assault, Horus, filled with the dark power of chaos, made a bold and fateful move. He lowered the shields of his flagship, daring the Emperor to face him directly. It was a challenge, a final invitation for father and son to settle their conflict once and for all. The Emperor, seeing that the moment had come, knew that he had no choice but to confront Horus. Accompanied by a handful of his most trusted warriors, the Emperor teleported aboard Horus's battle barge. There, amidst the wreckage of a shattered starship, father and son met for the last time. Horus had become something unrecognizable. No longer the charismatic noble war master the Emperor had once known, he was now a creature of the warp, his soul twisted by the influence of the Chaos Gods. His eyes burned with hatred and madness, his body crackling with dark energy, but there was still something of Horus within him. Something that the Emperor could sense. Despite everything, the Emperor still loved his son, still believed that Horus could be saved. But Horus had no such illusions. He had fully embraced the power of chaos, and he had no intention of turning back. The final confrontation between father and son was brutal and swift. Horus, empowered by the dark gods, struck with a fury that even the Emperor found difficult to match. The two titans clashed, their blows shaking the very foundations of the ship around them. Each strike from Horus was fueled by the raw power of the warp, and each counter from the Emperor was an effort to reach the son he had lost. In the end, it was Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch, who first faced Horus. Sanguinius fought valiantly, but he was no match for the War Master's newfound strength. Horus killed him, and his death sent a shockwave of grief through the Emperor. But the loss of Sanguinius also steeled the Emperor's resolve. There was no more room for hope, no chance of redemption. Horus struck the Emperor with a blow that should have ended him, and for a moment the Emperor faltered. But in that moment, the Emperor saw the truth. Horus was beyond saving. The son he had loved was gone, consumed entirely by chaos. With great sorrow, the Emperor unleashed his full power in a single devastating act of will. He obliterated Horus, wiping his existence from the warp and the material world. But the cost was high. The Emperor's body was shattered, broken beyond repair. Mortally wounded, the Emperor was brought back to Terra, where he was entombed upon the Golden Throne, a life support device that would keep his body alive, but only just. His physical form was ruined, his dream in tatters. The Imperium had been saved, but at a terrible price. The Emperor's dream of a united, enlightened humanity, free from the clutches of chaos, had been dealt a grievous blow. The galaxy was plunged into darkness, the Imperium shattered by civil war. Horus, the favored son, was gone, and with him the hope of a future where humanity could stand as one. The Emperor of mankind, once the most powerful and radiant figure in the galaxy, now sits immobile upon the Golden Throne. His body, ravaged beyond repair by the battle with Horus, is a broken shell kept alive only by the arcane technologies of the throne itself. The being who had once marched across the stars at the head of humanity's legions is now little more than a living corpse, his shattered form barely clinging to life. But though his body is ruined, his mind endures. The Emperor, even in his near-death state, continues to exert his will over the Imperium, holding the darkness at bay. The Golden Throne is a marvel of ancient technology fused with powerful psychic mechanisms, and is all that sustains the Emperor's broken form. Originally intended to serve as the linchpin of the Webway project, the throne has been repurposed into a life support system for the Emperor, keeping him alive in a state between life and death. The Emperor is no longer capable of speech or movement, his once majestic frame reduced to a withered husk. His golden armor, now tarnished, serves only as a reminder of the godlike figure he once was. Yet despite his ruined body, the Emperor's psychic presence remains immense. He is far from dead. In fact, it is only his immense willpower and psychic strength that allows him to endure this limbo, trapped in his decaying flesh. The Emperor sustains the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon of unimaginable power that stretches across the galaxy, guiding the ships of the Imperium through the treacherous tides of the warp. Without it, warp travel would be impossible, and the Imperium would fragment, its countless worlds isolated and vulnerable to the predations of Chaos and Xenos alike. The cost of this eternal vigil is steep. Every moment the Emperor remains on the throne, he sacrifices more of himself. His body, already crumbling, withers further, his psychic energy draining as it feeds the Astronomicon's blazing light. Thousands of psychers are sacrificed daily to the throne, their life force burned away to fuel the beacon. But even that is not enough. The Emperor's existence is a constant battle, a struggle to maintain the light that keeps humanity connected while his physical form deteriorates into dust. To the countless billions of souls across the Imperium, the Emperor is worshipped as a god. His image is everywhere, on banners, in cathedrals, on the lips of priests who preach his divine will. But those who know the truth, his inner circle, the High Lords of Terra, understand the terrible reality. The Emperor is not a god, but a man who is dying slowly, inch by inch, his once great body reduced to a corpse, and yet his will is all that keeps the Imperium from collapsing. Though confined to the Golden Throne, the Emperor's influence still shapes the destiny of mankind. His psychic presence, vast and unyielding, extends far beyond his ruined body. Across the warp, his mind stretches out like an indomitable force, a lighthouse in the tempest that prevents chaos from overwhelming the galaxy. His spirit remains locked in eternal vigilance, constantly battling the demons and dark gods that seek to corrupt and destroy humanity. The Emperor's continued existence is not passive. Though he can no longer speak, his will is felt by the most loyal and devout of his servants. He communicates through visions, dreams, and psychic impressions, guiding those who are sensitive to his presence. Inquisitors, psychers, and even ordinary humans occasionally feel his touch. A whisper of direction, or a warning of the dangers that lie ahead. His presence within the warp acts as both a guide and a shield, steering humanity through the darkest of times and reminding them of the price of failure. His most loyal servants, the Adeptus Custodes, never leave his side. These golden armored warriors, the personal bodyguard of the Emperor, remain ever vigilant in the halls of the Imperial Palace, guarding their master from any who might seek to disturb his rest. They, along with the High Lords of Terra, ensure that the Emperor's will is carried out, that the Imperium continues to function, even as its ruler languishes on the edge of life and death. Yet the Emperor's influence is not limited to those who stand close to him. Across the Imperium, from the far-flung frontier worlds to the ancient hives of Terra itself, countless individuals carry out the Emperor's will, often without knowing it. His psychic presence resonates across the stars, subtly nudging events, shaping the decisions of key figures, and influencing the course of history. The Imperium, fractured and beset by enemies on all sides, still marches forward, its people driven by the shared belief that the Emperor watches over them, even from his immobile state. But there is a darker side to the Emperor's continued existence. Though his spirit remains strong, the warp presses ever closer. The Chaos Gods, enraged by his survival, plot endlessly to break his hold over the Astronomicon, to extinguish the light that keeps their influence at bay. Every moment the Emperor spends on the Golden Throne is a battle, not just to sustain the beacon, but to keep the demonic forces from breaching the veil between worlds. His mind is locked in an eternal struggle, a psychic war fought across the warp itself. And though the Emperor remains undefeated, the strain is enormous. Though the Emperor's body is broken and his empire fractured, his grand vision for humanity is not yet dead. Even in his immobile state, the Emperor continues to push humanity toward its ultimate destiny. His influence remains, though it is felt more subtly now than during the days of the Great Crusade. His plan, the ascension of humanity to a state where it can resist the influence of chaos and rule the stars, is still in motion. The Imperium, though flawed and often brutal, is the foundation of that plan. The Emperor's dream of a united galaxy, free from the taint of chaos, lives on in the hearts of his most devout followers. The imperial truth, though overshadowed by the rise of the ecclesiarchy and the worship of the Emperor as a god, still exists in fragments, carried by those who understand the true nature of the warp and the dangers it presents. The dream of a galaxy ruled by reason and science, free from superstition, is distant but not forgotten. But the Emperor's ultimate goal, the final confrontation with chaos, has yet to come. His work on the Webway project, though interrupted by the Horus heresy, remains crucial to his plan. The Webway, if it can ever be fully secured, offers humanity a path forward, a way to travel the stars without relying on the warp and its corrupting influence. Though the project lies dormant for now, it is not forgotten. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the remnants of the Webway Gate remain, and the Emperor's mind, even in its fragmented state, continues to search for a solution. There are those within the Imperium who believe that the Emperor's ultimate ascension is still possible, that he will rise from the Golden Throne, reborn in a new form to lead humanity into a golden age. Others fear that his death is inevitable, and that when he finally passes from the mortal plane, the Imperium will fall into chaos and ruin. The truth is known only to the Emperor himself, and he remains silent, locked in his eternal vigil. For now, the Emperor endures, his mind still fighting to protect humanity from the horrors of the warp. The golden light of the Astronomicon burns on, a beacon of hope for a galaxy teetering on the edge of destruction. His dream is not yet dead, and as long as the Emperor remains, there is still a chance, however faint, that his vision for humanity's future can be realized. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, as humanity battles for survival, the Emperor's will continues to shape the destiny of mankind, pushing them ever closer to the final confrontation with the forces of chaos. And so, the Emperor of mankind sits upon his throne, his body shattered, his mind eternal, watching over his people as they fight for their survival in a galaxy filled with darkness. His dream is not yet lost, and as long as his spirit endures, the light of hope will never be fully extinguished. The Imperium of Man, the colossal empire that sprawls across the galaxy, stands as the ultimate testament to the Emperor's enduring influence. His great crusade brought humanity back from the brink of extinction, scattering the darkness of the Age of Strife and reunifying the shattered remnants of human civilization. Under the Emperor's banner, humanity expanded across the stars, reclaiming lost worlds, driving back the threats of Xenos empires, and waging war against the forces of chaos. It was a triumph of will and vision, one that should have heralded the dawning of a new golden age. But the Imperium that remains 10,000 years after the Emperor's mortal form was broken in his final battle with Horus is a far cry from the enlightened society he had envisioned. The Imperium of Man has become a theocratic state, rigid and unyielding in its doctrines, ruled by an iron-fisted bureaucracy that claims to act in the Emperor's name. The imperial truth, once the Emperor's guiding principle, a rejection of gods and superstition in favor of reason and scientific advancement, has been replaced by the worship of the Emperor himself as a god. The ecclesiarchy, the religious arm of the Imperium, presides over a faith that venerates the Emperor as the God-Emperor of mankind, a divine figure whose light protects humanity from the darkness of the galaxy. Cathedrals to his glory rise from the surface of every imperial world, and his image is worshipped in every corner of the Imperium. Billions of voices pray to him each day, offering supplication and sacrifices, convinced that it is their faith that keeps the darkness at bay. The irony is palpable, for the Emperor never wanted to be worshipped. He had fought to eliminate the very idea of gods, recognizing the danger of such beliefs, how they fed the chaos gods and distorted the true potential of humanity. But in his absence, the Imperium turned him into the very thing he had sought to destroy. The Emperor, locked in his eternal vigil on the Golden Throne, watches this unfold with no way to correct the course of his empire. His silence has been interpreted as divine will, and the Imperium of Man has become a monument to the very superstitions and fears he had tried to eradicate. Yet, despite all of this, the Imperium endures. It is a brutal authoritarian regime, beset on all sides by alien empires, the ever-present threat of chaos and internal decay. But it survives. It is the last bulwark against the forces that would see humanity consumed by darkness. And in that, at least, the Emperor's legacy remains true. His Imperium is mankind's only hope in a galaxy filled with horrors. Though the Imperium has drifted far from his original vision, the Emperor's work is not finished. For 10,000 years he has remained locked in his state of eternal suffering, his mind still active, his spirit still fighting the unending war against chaos. The Golden Throne sustains his body, but it is his will that sustains the Imperium. The Emperor's mind is a bastion in the warp, his psychic light burning across the galaxy, holding back the tides of chaos that would otherwise engulf humanity. This is his long watch, an unending vigil, where every moment is spent fending off the forces that seek to corrupt and destroy his empire. Though his body is broken, His soul remains the ultimate weapon against the demons, and dark gods who long for the Imperiums collapse. There are those within the Imperium who believe the Emperor will one day rise again. The legend of the Emperor's return, a final ascension to lead humanity into a new golden age, is a persistent hope. Some claim that he is merely waiting for the right moment, that the Emperor's body will be restored, and that he will once again walk among his people. Others believe that his death, should it ever come, will mark the end of humanity, that when the Emperor finally passes from existence, so too will the Imperium fall. The truth is known only to the Emperor himself, and he remains silent, locked in his eternal vigil. For now, the Emperor watches. He guides in subtle ways, sending visions to his most trusted servants, ensuring that the threats facing humanity are met with the full force of the Imperium's might. But his grand plan, the dream of humanity's ascension, remains unfulfilled. The Webway project lies abandoned. His Primarchs are scattered, some dead, others missing, and the Imperium is fractured and stagnant. The Emperor knows that a final confrontation with chaos is inevitable, and that when it comes, humanity must be ready. The galaxy teeters on the brink of ruin. The Imperium, vast though it is under constant siege. Alien races like the Tyranids, Orcs and Necrons threaten its borders, while the ancient Eldar look on with a mixture of disdain and sorrow, their own empire long fallen. But it is chaos, ever lurking in the warp, that remains the greatest threat. The Chaos Gods, despite their defeat in the Horus Heresy, have never given up their quest to claim the soul of humanity. Their whispers of corruption and madness continue to spread, and the Imperium, for all its strength, is vulnerable. The galaxy is a dark and brutal place, where survival is a constant struggle. For the ordinary citizens of the Imperium, life is a grim existence, filled with toil, fear, and blind faith. Entire worlds are lost to war, consumed by Xenos invasions, or torn apart by the machinations of chaos. Even the Imperium's most powerful institutions, the Inquisition, the Adeptus Astartes, the Mechanicum, are fraught with internal strife and decay. The Emperor's great empire, once the beacon of human potential, has become a fortress beset on all sides. And yet there is hope. The Emperor's light still shines, however faintly. His will still shapes the destiny of humanity. And even as the galaxy burns, there are those who fight for the dream he once had. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, remain ever vigilant, standing watch over his throne, waiting for the day when their master will rise again. The Space Marines, his greatest warriors, still carry out his will, though their numbers dwindle with each passing century. The future of the galaxy hangs in the balance. Will the Emperor's dream for humanity ever be realized? Or will the forces of chaos finally break through and consume all? It is a question that has no answer, at least not yet. The Imperium stands, but for how long? The light of the Astronomicon still guides humanity's ships through the warp, but even that light could one day be extinguished. The Emperor's legacy is one of hope, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. His Imperium, flawed and battered though it may be, is still the last great bastion of human civilization in a galaxy filled with unimaginable horrors. And as long as the Emperor remains on the Golden Throne, as long as his will continues to push humanity forward, there is still a chance that his dream will one day come to fruition. The galaxy waits on the edge of a knife, and the Emperor watches. His long vigil continues, his spirit unbroken, preparing for the final battle that will decide the fate of all.